I've been debating posting this for a long time, but every time I sit down to write it, my hands start shaking. It's like some part of me knows that putting this out there is dangerous, but screw it. I have to tell someone. I have to get this off my chest. I think this might be the only way to make peace with what happened. A few months ago, my life was in absolute shambles. You know how you think you've hit rock bottom, but then somehow you find yourself beneath the floor? That was me. My boss, this complete asshole named Greg, made my life hell. I know everyone says that about their boss, but this guy was on another level. He didn't just give you extra work or chew you out for being 5 minutes late. He was cruel in a way that got under your skin. It started small, snide comments, passive-aggressive emails. You could brush that off. But Greg had a way of finding your weaknesses, things you didn't even know he knew about. For me, it was my dad. I lost my dad a few years ago, and Greg knew it messed me up pretty bad. So one day, out of nowhere, he casually mentioned how I was probably the type of guy who'd leave his family to rot if they needed him. He said it in front of everyone at a meeting while looking right at me. Nobody laughed. It was awkward as hell. But that's what he did. He would make you feel small, powerless, and he enjoyed it. I tried to keep my head down, but Greg just kept pushing. And it wasn't just at work. He somehow knew about my personal life. He knew about my girlfriend Sarah and our issues. He'd dropped these subtle digs like, "Relationships are hard, huh? Especially when you're too self-absorbed to care about the other person." I don't know how he knew about our fights, but he did. And the worst part was that I was stuck. I needed the job. I had debt, bills piling up, and Sarah wasn't exactly contributing much. Then, one night after a particularly brutal day at work, I found myself drunk and scrolling through Reddit. That's when I came across a thread about the dark web. It wasn't the first time I'd heard of it, but this thread was different. People were talking about how you could hire services on there, anything from petty revenge to, well, darker stuff. I don't know what possessed me to dig deeper, but I did. I think I was just that desperate to make Greg pay. I downloaded Tor, the browser you need to access the dark web, and found myself in a part of the internet that didn't feel real. It was like a bad dream. This twisted version of reality where people sold drugs, weapons, and things I can't even describe. But what caught my attention was a site called Shadow Brokers. It looked like something out of an old 90s hacker movie. Basic, clunky, but what they offered, that was something else. I wasn't looking to get Greg killed or anything. Let's get that straight. I just wanted to mess with him, humiliate him, maybe get him fired. Shadow Brokers had a service called personal sabotage. The description was vague, but it promised to ruin someone's life through strategic information leaks and psychological warfare. It was expensive, more than I could afford, but the idea of finally getting back at Greg made it feel worth it. So I did something that still makes my stomach turn when I think about it. I borrowed from my credit card and hired them. There was a form where I had to fill in details, Greg's name, where he worked, his social media. There was a section asking for sensitive information. I didn't have anything really juicy, but I mentioned some of the stuff I'd heard about him cheating on his wife. It was mostly rumor, but I figured they could do something with it. Once I hit submit, the screen just said, "Request received. Expect results within 2 weeks." That was it. No confirmation email, no receipt, nothing. I sat there staring at my computer, feeling a weird mix of excitement and guilt. But honestly, in that moment, the guilt wasn't as strong as I thought it would be. I was angry. I wanted Greg to suffer. The first week, nothing happened. Greg was still his usual unbearable self, and I started to think I'd been scammed out of a couple $1,000. I tried to forget about it, but then things started getting weird. It started with Greg acting different. At first it was subtle. He wasn't as cocky at meetings. He didn't have that same sneer on his face when he tore into someone. He seemed distracted, nervous. I thought maybe the dark web guys were just feeding him some bad info, like getting into his email or something small. But then, it escalated. About a week after I submitted the request, Greg didn't show up to work. It was weird because this guy never took a day off. He was always there, watching, judging. But now he was MIA. I didn't think too much of it until I overheard a conversation between two co-workers. Apparently Greg had been found wandering around the city in the middle of the night, completely out of it. His wife called the cops because he was walking barefoot down the street, muttering to himself. The rumor was he'd had some kind of breakdown, but no one knew for sure. He was back at work a few days later, but something was off. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were sunken in, and he kept glancing over his shoulder like someone was watching him. I thought maybe this is it. Maybe the guys from Shadow Brokers are messing with him, and for a while I was satisfied with that. I mean, I didn't expect him to fall apart so fast, but hey, if it worked, right? Then one day after lunch, I walked into the break room and saw Greg standing by the fridge. He didn't notice me at first, but when he turned around, he flinched like I'd startled him. That's when I noticed his arm. He had these deep scratches running down his forearm, like he'd been clawing at himself. I don't know if it was stress, drugs, or something else, but the guy looked bad. "Everything okay, Greg?" I asked, trying to keep it casual, but inside I was freaking out. This was getting real. He didn't respond at first. He just stared at me with this vacant expression. Then, after what felt like forever, he mumbled, "They know. They're coming for me." I laughed it off, thinking he was just losing it, but something about the way he said it stuck with me. Who was they? Was this part of the sabotage I'd hired, or was something else going on? Later that day, I got an anonymous email. The subject line just said, "Phase 1 complete. Phase 2 begins tomorrow." That's when I realized, whatever I'd started, it wasn't over. It was just getting started. I didn't sleep that night. I kept checking my phone, expecting more emails, more updates, but nothing came. The next morning, Greg didn't show up for work again. A few hours into the day, the police showed up. They went straight to HR, and by lunchtime the whole office was buzzing with rumors. Greg was missing. Apparently, his wife reported him missing after he left the house in the middle of the night and never came back. His car was still in the driveway, and his phone had been left on the kitchen counter. No one had heard from him since. I should have been scared, but honestly, I felt relieved. The guy was out of my life, and I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. Because that night, I got another email. Phase 2 complete. Await Phase 3. And that's when the real horror started. I swear I didn't sleep for more than 10 minutes after that second email. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what the hell Phase 3 could mean. Was it over? Had Greg just disappeared? Maybe he went off the grid, cracked under the pressure or something. Either way, I figured I'd already gotten what I wanted. He was gone, and I was finally free of him. But there was still this gnawing feeling in my gut that I couldn't shake. The next morning, I dragged myself to work, completely exhausted. Everyone in the office was on edge. HR sent out an email saying Greg had taken an indefinite leave of absence, which was corporate speak for we don't know where the hell he is either. People were whispering about it in the halls, trying to piece together what happened. Some people thought he'd had a mental breakdown. Others said he was on drugs. The whole office was spinning conspiracy theories, and part of me wanted to join in, to act like I had no idea. But I couldn't. I just kept my head down, not saying a word. That's when things started happening to me. It began with small, creepy stuff. I'd come home from work, and my front door would be unlocked. At first I thought it was Sarah. Maybe she'd gone out and forgotten to lock up. But then it happened again, and again, even when I knew for a fact I had locked it. One night I got home late, around midnight. Sarah was staying at her mom's that weekend, so it was just me. The door was locked when I left that morning, I was sure of it. But when I came back, not only was it unlocked, it was slightly open. That was my first real moment of panic. I stood there in the hallway for what felt like hours, just staring at the door. I was too scared to go inside, but I didn't want to call the cops either. What was I going to say? "Hey, I think someone's been inside my house, but nothing's missing and I can't prove it." I finally got the nerve to push the door open. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. I checked every room, every closet, under the bed, even though I felt like an idiot doing it. There was no sign of anyone, but I could still feel it, that thick, heavy sensation that something wasn't right. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing these weird creaks and knocks coming from the walls. It's an old building, so I told myself it was just the pipes or something, but deep down I knew it wasn't. I lay there in bed, eyes wide open, waiting for something to happen, and then it did. At around 3 a.m. my phone buzzed. It was another email, but this one was different. There was no subject line, no sender, just a single attachment. A photo. My hands were shaking as I opened it, but I couldn't stop myself. It was a picture of me, sleeping. I don't remember the exact moment I dropped my phone, but the next thing I knew, I was out of bed, pacing around the room, heart pounding in my chest. Someone had been in my apartment. Someone had been watching me while I slept. I went to the front door again, checked the locks. They were fine. I looked out the windows, but there was no one there. My mind was racing, trying to figure out who could have done this. Was it Greg? Had he lost it completely and started stalking me? Or was it someone from the dark web? Was this part of the deal I made? I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat there in the dark, waiting for something to happen, waiting for another email, another photo, another sign that I wasn't safe. The next day at work, I was a wreck. I hadn't eaten, hadn't slept, and I was constantly looking over my shoulder. I couldn't focus on anything. Every time someone walked by my desk, I jumped. I felt like my skin was crawling, like someone was watching me from every angle. I started to wonder if I'd made a huge mistake. Maybe messing with Greg wasn't worth it. Maybe I should have just left it alone. But it was too late now. Around noon, I got called into HR. My heart sank. I thought for sure they'd found out about what I'd done. Maybe the dark web guys had leaked something, or maybe Greg had told someone before he disappeared. But when I walked in, it wasn't what I expected at all. HR told me that Greg had officially resigned. His wife had filed for divorce, and apparently he was under investigation for some really messed up stuff. Fraud, extortion, even some dark web connections. The weirdest part was that no one had actually seen him. His resignation was submitted through his lawyer, and his wife hadn't heard from him in days. It was like he'd vanished off the face of the earth. On the outside, I acted shocked, like this was all news to me, but inside, I felt sick. I knew this was because of what I'd done. The guys from the dark web had worked fast, too fast. I didn't know what kind of dirt they'd found on Greg, but whatever it was, it had completely ruined him, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't done paying for it. That night, I got home and found another email waiting for me. My hands were trembling as I opened it. This one had a subject line, Phase 3. The email was short. It just said, Phase 3 complete. We are always watching. Below that, there was a link to a video. I don't know why I clicked it. I guess some part of me needed to know what was next. The video was blurry at first, but as the image sharpened, my stomach dropped. It was a live feed of my apartment. The camera was set up somewhere in the living room, pointed directly at the couch where I'd sometimes sit and watch TV. I felt the blood drain from my face. I'd checked the whole place, hadn't I? I'd looked for cameras, for anything suspicious, but I'd missed this. How had I missed this? I stood there, staring at the screen, too scared to move, and then the camera shifted. It moved slightly, like someone was adjusting it. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. There was someone in my apartment. I don't know how long I stood there frozen, but it felt like hours. I didn't hear anything, didn't see anything out of the ordinary, but I knew they were there, watching me. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my keys and bolted out the door. I didn't even lock it behind me. I just ran. Ran down the stairs, out of the building and into the street. I didn't stop running until I was halfway across town. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away. I ended up crashing at a friend's place that night. I didn't tell him what was really going on. I just said I needed a break, needed to get away from some crazy stuff happening at work. But deep down, I knew I couldn't run from this. Whoever, or whatever, was behind this wasn't going to stop. The next morning I went back to my apartment, but I didn't go inside. I just stood across the street watching the windows, trying to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. But I knew it was real. I knew I'd opened a door I couldn't close. The worst part, the emails haven't stopped. Every few days, I get another one. Sometimes it's just a blank message. Sometimes there's a new photo, me in my apartment, me at work, me in places I didn't even know were being watched. And the last one I got, that was different. It just said, "We're closer than you think." I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know if I can stop it, but I can feel it. Whatever I started with Greg, it's coming for me now. And I don't think there's anything I can do to stop it. I haven't slept in days. I've tried, believe me, but every time I close my eyes, I get this suffocating feeling that someone's standing right over me, watching. Even when I'm awake, I feel it. This constant pressure on my chest, like something horrible is about to happen, but I don't know when or where. The worst part, the emails won't stop. They've become part of my daily life now, like a sick game, and I know I'm losing. After that last message, "We're closer than you think," I thought about going to the police, but what was I going to tell them? "Oh hey officers, I hired a dark web service to ruin my boss's life, and now I'm being watched." They'd probably arrest me on the spot. Besides, there wasn't any hard evidence. No fingerprints, no break-ins, no stolen items, just this creeping sensation that my life was unraveling inch by inch. The emails became more frequent. Every day around 3 a.m. without fail, I'd get something in my inbox. Most of them were short, cryptic, but each one felt more invasive, more personal. Like they knew things about me that I hadn't told anyone. Little details, stuff from my childhood, embarrassing memories I thought I'd buried. I started to wonder if I was being followed, if they had hacked into my phone, my computer, everything. Then the videos started. It wasn't just a live feed of my apartment anymore. No, they were videos of me, going about my day. There was one of me sitting at my desk at work, typing away, completely unaware that someone was filming me from a distance. Another one was of me at a cafe, sipping coffee while scrolling through my phone. But the scariest one, the one that made my skin crawl, it was a video of me in the shower. It wasn't clear at first. The angle was weird, like they were recording from a small crack in the bathroom door. I could see my outline, blurred by the shower curtain, but there was no mistaking it. It was me, completely vulnerable, naked and unaware. That's when I lost it. I smashed my phone against the wall, shattering it into pieces. I didn't care. I just wanted it to stop. I felt like a trapped animal, cornered, with nowhere to go. But that didn't stop the emails. In fact, it made things worse. The next day, a new email came. This time, there was no attachment, just one sentence. "You can't hide from us." I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash my head against the wall, break every mirror in my apartment, tear down the walls. But I didn't. Instead, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went back onto the dark web. I needed answers. I needed to know who these people were, what they wanted, and how I could make it stop. Maybe if I could talk to them, reason with them, I could put an end to it. So, I logged back into the site where I'd hired the service. Shadow brokers. My heart was pounding as the homepage loaded. It looked the same as before, basic and outdated, but there was one thing I noticed immediately, a new message in my inbox. The subject line was blank, but when I opened it, I nearly threw up. It was a list, a detailed account of everything I'd done over the past week, every location I'd been to, every conversation I'd had, even private moments between me and Sarah. But that wasn't the worst part. At the bottom of the list was a name I hadn't seen in years, Derek. Derek was a friend from college, someone I hadn't spoken to in a long time. We'd had a falling out years ago over something stupid, money I think, But I hadn't given him a second thought since then. Seeing his name at the end of that list felt like a punch to the gut. Then I scrolled down further, and my heart sank. There was a photo attached, and it wasn't of me. It was Derek. He was lying on the floor of what looked like his apartment, but there was something wrong with the picture. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide open, staring up at the ceiling. Blood pooled around his head, leaking out from a jagged cut across his throat. Below the photo there was a simple message: Phase 3 is complete. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred, and for a second I thought I was going to pass out. I backed away from the computer, stumbling over the chair, and ran to the bathroom. I barely made it to the sink before I vomited. Derek was dead. They had killed him, and it was all my fault. I don't remember how long I stood there, gripping the edge of the sink, staring at my reflection. I looked like a ghost, pale, eyes bloodshot, trembling like a junkie going through withdrawal. I couldn't go to the police. They'd ask too many questions I couldn't answer. How was I supposed to explain any of this? How was I supposed to live with the fact that I had gotten someone killed? That's when I realized something. I wasn't the target anymore. I had been at first, sure, but now they were going after the people in my life. People I hadn't spoken to in years, people I thought were out of the picture.
I spent the rest of the night in a daze, trying to figure out what to do next. I thought about contacting Derek's family, but what would I even say? Hey, I know we haven't talked in a while, but your son's dead and it's kinda my fault. No, I couldn't do that. So I just sat there in my dark apartment, shaking, waiting for the next email, the next wave of terror. A few days passed and I thought maybe, just maybe, it was over. No more emails, no more creepy videos or photos. I hadn't seen anyone lurking outside my apartment or following me on the street. I told myself that they were done with me, that I'd paid the price for what I'd done to Greg, and now I could move on. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. One night, I was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels, trying to distract myself. Sarah was still at her mum's, so I was alone again. The apartment was dark, except for the flickering light from the TV. That's when I heard it, the sound of a door creaking open. At first I thought it was coming from the hallway, but then I realized it was closer. It was coming from my bedroom. My blood turned to ice. I stood up slowly, my whole body tense, every nerve on high alert. I didn't want to go in there, but I had to. I couldn't just sit there and wait for whatever was in my apartment to come to me. I grabbed a kitchen knife, not that it would do me any good, and crept down the hallway, my heart pounding in my ears. The bedroom door was open, just a crack. I nudged it open with the tip of the knife, my hand shaking so bad I thought I might drop it. There was no one there, but the window was wide open. I rushed to the window, looking out into the dark alley below, but I didn't see anyone. No shadows, no movement, nothing. I slammed the window shut and locked it, my hands slick with sweat. Then I turned around and saw something that made my stomach drop. There, on the bed, was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't there before. I swear it wasn't. I picked it up, my fingers trembling, and read the words written in thick black ink. "You're next." I dropped the paper and backed out of the room, my whole body shaking. They were still here. They were still watching. And no matter what I did, no matter where I went, I couldn't escape them. I ran out of the apartment without thinking, leaving everything behind. My phone, my wallet, my keys. I didn't care. I just needed to get out. I needed to get away from whatever was closing in on me. But deep down, I knew I couldn't run forever, because they were always one step ahead, and I had no idea what was waiting for me in Phase 4. I don't know where to begin anymore. My head's a mess. It's like I'm constantly walking around in this fog, my nerves shot, my brain scrambled, like I'm not even human anymore. And the worst part, I don't know who to trust. Sarah came back home after a few days at her mom's, and I couldn't even look her in the eye. She kept asking what was wrong, but what was I supposed to say? "Hey babe, sorry I've been acting weird lately. It's just that I hired someone on the dark web to ruin my boss's life, and now I'm probably being hunted down by some psycho network of people that may or may not want to kill me. Yeah, not exactly the kind of conversation you have over dinner. After I found that note on my bed, "You're next," I didn't go back to my apartment for days. I crashed at some cheap, run-down motel across town, one of those places where people pay in cash and nobody asks questions. I figured maybe I could lay low for a bit, wait it out, let whatever this was just blow over. But the problem is, you can't hide from people who know how to find you. Not when they've already been inside your home, inside your life. It didn't take long for the paranoia to creep in. Every time I left the motel, I felt like someone was following me. It didn't matter where I went, the grocery store, a gas station, hell, even just taking a walk down the block. I always had that feeling in the pit of my stomach that eyes were on me, tracking every move. And the worst part, I had no idea who they were or what they looked like. The emails came back too. This time, they weren't just cryptic threats. They were worse. They had stepped things up to a level that I hadn't expected. Now, instead of just sending creepy messages or videos, they were showing me just how much control they had. It started with small things, like the lights in my motel room flickering on and off. At first, I thought it was just bad wiring. The place was a dump after all. But then, one night, I came back from a late-night run to clear my head, and all of the lights were on in my room. Every single one. The lamps, the bathroom light, even the TV was blasting static, even though I was sure I had turned everything off before leaving. I stood in the doorway, staring at the flickering lights, trying to wrap my head around it. Someone had been in there. They weren't just messing with my apartment anymore. They'd found me here, in this grimy, anonymous motel. I should have left then. I should have run. But where the hell was I supposed to go? Then, the TV screen changed from static to something else, a video. At first it was blurry, the screen jumping with distortion. But then it sharpened into focus, and my heart dropped into my stomach. The video was of Sarah. It was her, sitting on the couch in our apartment, completely unaware that she was being filmed. She was just scrolling through her phone, probably texting me, wondering where I was. My blood ran cold. The video cut, then flashed to another scene. This time, it was Sarah in the kitchen, making dinner. Again, she had no idea she was being watched. Then the screen jumped again. This time, it showed her sleeping in our bed, completely vulnerable. My hands started shaking uncontrollably. They weren't just messing with me anymore, they were dragging Sarah into this, and I had no idea how far they were willing to go. I grabbed my phone and tried calling her. It rang a few times, then went to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. Panic gripped me as I dialed over and over, but she didn't pick up. My mind started racing with all the worst possible scenarios. What if they were already there? What if they had her? I was halfway out the door, ready to rush back to the apartment when I got another email. This time there was no subject line, just a video attachment. My stomach twisted as I clicked it, my hands slick with sweat. It was another video of Sarah, but this time she wasn't at home. She was tied to a chair in a dark, grimy basement. The only light came from a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows across her face. Her eyes were wide with terror, and her mouth was gagged with a strip of dirty cloth. She was struggling, pulling at the ropes binding her hands and feet, but it was no use. She was trapped. I could barely breathe. My vision tunneled, and I had to hold onto the doorframe to keep from collapsing. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be real. They had Sarah, and I had no idea where she was. The video continued, and then I heard something that made my blood freeze. A voice. A low, distorted voice, coming from somewhere off screen. I couldn't make out the words at first, but then it became clear. "You should have left it alone."
I wanted to scream, to smash my phone against the wall, but I couldn't move. My mind was racing, my heart pounding in my chest, threatening to explode. I had dragged Sarah into this nightmare, and now she was paying for it. I stared at the screen, waiting for something else to happen, for the voice to give me some clue, anything I could use to find her. But instead, the video cut to black. Another email pinged in my inbox seconds later. The subject line read, "Phase 4 begins now." The body of the email was empty, except for a single link. I didn't want to click it. I knew it was a trap, another twisted game. But what choice did I have? I had to know what they wanted. I had to save Sarah. The link opened a map, an address. It was a warehouse on the outskirts of town, somewhere I'd never been. My heart raced as I realized what they were doing. They wanted me to come. They were luring me in, dragging me deeper into their sick game. But I didn't have a choice. I grabbed my jacket and the knife I'd been keeping under my pillow, and I headed out the door. My hands were shaking the entire drive, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What was waiting for me at that warehouse? Was this a trap? Were they going to kill me? I didn't care anymore. I just needed to find Sarah to end this nightmare. By the time I reached the warehouse, it was already pitch black outside. The place looked abandoned, surrounded by nothing but empty lots and broken-down buildings. I parked my car a block away, my heart pounding in my chest as I approached the rusted metal door. I had no idea what I was walking into. The door creaked open with a groan, and the smell hit me immediately. Damp, moldy air mixed with something else, something metallic, blood. My stomach churned, but I pushed forward, knife in hand. The warehouse was dark, the only light coming from a flickering bulb somewhere deep inside. Every step I took echoed through the empty space, and I could feel eyes on me, watching from the shadows. Finally, I reached a large room at the back of the warehouse. There was a single chair in the middle of the room, and sitting in it, tied up and gagged, was Sarah. I rushed over to her, my heart pounding in my chest. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she was trying to scream through the gag. I fumbled with the ropes, my hands shaking so badly I could barely untie the knots. "It's okay. I'm here. I'm here," I kept whispering, trying to calm her down, trying to calm myself down. But then, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from behind me. I froze, my blood running cold. I turned around, and there, standing in the doorway, was a figure. I couldn't make out their face. It was covered by a hood, their body wrapped in shadows. But I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. Then, they spoke. "You think this is over?" My heart stopped. The voice was low, distorted, just like the one from the video, but this time there was something else in it, something darker, more personal. Phase 5 begins now. I didn't have time to react before the lights went out, plunging the room into complete darkness. I heard Sarah scream, and then the sound of footsteps rushing toward me. And that's when I realized I wasn't the only one in the room. The second the lights went out, I knew I was screwed. Pitch black, total silence, and the sound of those footsteps closing in fast. Sarah was still screaming behind me, but her voice was muffled, panicked, like she was being dragged further into the darkness. I swung the knife wildly, trying to hit something, anything, but all I felt was air. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest I thought it might explode. It was like the darkness was alive, swallowing me whole, twisting around my mind. Then, I felt it. Hands. Cold, clammy fingers gripping my arm, pulling me backward with a force I wasn't ready for. I hit the ground hard, the knife slipping from my hand and clattering somewhere out of reach. I tried to scramble to my feet, but the grip on my arm was too strong. Whoever had me was dragging me deeper into the warehouse, away from the faint light coming from the doorway. I could barely hear Sarah anymore, just my own panicked breathing and the sound of something scraping along the concrete behind me. I was going to die. This was it. They had lured me here to kill me. I thought of all the choices that had led me to this moment, one bad decision after another, each one pushing me further into this nightmare. And now, it was too late. Suddenly, I was yanked to my feet, and before I could react, a hand clamped over my mouth. I struggled, kicking and flailing, but it was useless. They had me. I felt something cold press against my neck, and I froze. A voice whispered in my ear, low and distorted, but clear enough to send chills down my spine. "You thought this was about Greg?" I wanted to scream, but the hand over my mouth kept me silent. My mind was racing. What the hell were they talking about? Of course this was about Greg. I had hired these people to ruin his life. That's what started all of this. Wasn't it? The voice chuckled softly, like it could read my thoughts. "You never understood what you were dealing with." I couldn't breathe. Every muscle in my body was tense, my mind spinning in circles. What did they mean? What had I missed? Then, the grip on me loosened slightly, and I was shoved forward, stumbling to the ground. The room was still dark, but I could make out faint outlines now, shadows moving in the distance. Sarah was there, tied to the chair again, but this time she wasn't alone. There were others, figures in the darkness, standing around her like statues, barely moving. I couldn't tell how many there were. 3, 4, more. My eyes were still adjusting, and my brain was working overtime to make sense of what I was seeing. This wasn't just some random group of thugs. This was something else, something organized, something bigger. The voice spoke again, this time from the shadows. "You thought you could pay us to destroy someone's life, to ruin your boss because he made you feel small?" My stomach dropped. How the hell did they know that? How did they know what Greg had done to me, the way he'd humiliated me day after day? The voice continued, smooth and taunting, like they enjoyed watching me squirm. "You were just a pawn. This was never about Greg. He was practice."
My head was spinning. Practice? What the hell were they talking about? I tried to speak, to say something, but my throat was too dry, and all that came out was a croak. The figures in the room started to move closer, their outlines becoming clearer as they stepped into the dim light. I could make out masks, plain, featureless masks that covered their faces. Their presence filled the room with a suffocating weight, pressing down on me from every side. One of them stepped forward, holding something small and black in their hands, my phone. They must have taken it when I was dragged inside. The figure tilted their head, studying the screen before tossing it to the ground in front of me. "You don't get it, do you? You invited us into your life." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold myself up. I stared at my phone, the screen cracked, but still flickering with the last message I had received from them. Phase 5 begins now. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was never about revenge. I had opened the door to something darker, something much worse than I had imagined. These people, whoever they were, weren't just some shady criminals from the dark web. They were something else entirely. Something more. The voice spoke again, cold and matter-of-fact. "We're not the ones who ruin lives. We just make sure people like you finish the job." I wanted to scream, to beg for my life, but I was too far gone. Every fiber of my being was consumed by fear. I had no control anymore. They had taken everything from me, my safety, my sanity, my sense of reality. And now they were about to take Sarah too. One of the figures moved towards Sarah, a blade glinting in their hand. I lunged forward, trying to stop them, but I was too slow, too weak. Another pair of hands grabbed me from behind, pulling me back to the ground. I was helpless, forced to watch. The figure raised the blade and Sarah's eyes locked onto mine. I'll never forget the look of pure terror on her face, the way her body tensed as she struggled against the ropes. It was all my fault. I had brought this on her, dragged her into my mess, and now she was going to pay for it with her life. The blade came down, but it didn't touch her. Instead, the figure slashed through the ropes, binding her to the chair, freeing her wrists and ankles in one swift motion. Sarah gasped, her body trembling, but she didn't move, neither did I. I was too stunned, too confused to even process what was happening. The voice spoke again, this time from directly behind me. "We're not killers. We're facilitators." I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck as the figure leaned in close. But now, you have to decide. Sarah walks free, or you do. My blood turned to ice. They were giving me a choice, a sick, twisted choice that I never saw coming. I could leave now, walk out of this warehouse alive, but Sarah, she'd be left behind. Or I could stay, and she'd walk free, never to be touched by them again. My mind raced, my heart pounding in my chest. Every part of me wanted to run, to escape this nightmare, but I couldn't leave Sarah behind. I had done this. I had caused this. She didn't deserve any of it. I couldn't abandon her. "I'll stay," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The room fell silent. I could feel the weight of their gaze on me, cold and unfeeling. The figure behind me chuckled softly. "Good choice." In an instant, Sarah was pulled to her feet by one of the masked figures and dragged toward the door. She struggled, screaming my name, begging me not to do this, but I couldn't look at her. I couldn't bear to see the fear in her eyes. This was the only way to save her. The door slammed shut behind her, and I was left alone in the dark with them. The voice spoke one last time. "Welcome to Phase 5. And then everything went black.